clearer at this point. The shooter, who was still in our custody, that was his home where the incident, initiated from. And he had two people at his home who were not residents, but they were somewhat transient. He located one individual somewhere in Jensen Beach, I was told, and the other guy was a friend of his who had been couch hopping. So they weren't permanent residents at that location. They don't have Port St. Lucie addresses. They were from out of this city, staying with him. They had been spending the last few days recreationally using cocaine. I understand that they had not slept in about 3 days, and their behavior became more and more erratic. Two of them, our shooter and actually the deceased victim, had at some point determined that the other victim was some type of foreign spy. They handcuffed him and had him held against his will for a portion of those 3 days. At some point, the victim, who ended up shot, exited the home, went to the house next door, and asked that homeowner to call 911 because our shooter was having chest pain. Shooter came out of the house. The other victim in handcuffs came out of the house. Now all three subjects are out on the street. Shooter walks over, shoots our victim, leaves him in front of a car in that driveway, and then he pursues the other victim, fires upon him. Fortunately misses. At some point he ends up having that victim on his knees while handcuffed, and he begins puts him in a rear choke and attempts to choke him out. Another resident happened to be driving down the street, pulls up, sees this playing out, starts videoing. He confronts that resident and lets go of the other victim, who now is able to escape. She drives off because he began getting violent with her vehicle, and she drives down the street, encounters our responding officers who, moved her out of the way, came up on scene, and then when they were able to take him into custody.
This guy was being held in handcuffs for 3 days?
I don't know how long. This whole thing was going on for 3 days with these three guys. How long he was in handcuffs, I don't know. It was a portion of that time.
And did you say that two of the participants had the third guy in handcuffs? They both handcuffed him together? They both took part in
That's the story that we're getting.
Okay.
Chief, the surviving victim, is he cooperating with investigators?
He is.
How many shots were fired as this guy in handcuffs was running down the street, and did any of the bullets strike any other houses nearby?
We were unable to locate any locations that the bullets rested, landed, where they ended up. We did a thorough canvass of the whole street. We weren't able to determine that. I don't know how many total shots were fired.
Okay. When we were out there an hour ago, there was crime scene tape behind the home where the individual lived, Mr. Hobel, and there was crime scene behind another neighbor's house. Did something happen in the backyard?
So in the backyard of the suspect's residence, a lot of the activity that occurred over the last few days were on the pool deck. So we were holding the scene because we had to execute a search warrant of his residence.
Were there any calls to service in that neighborhood in the past few days?
In the past few days, no. There is a call history at the suspect's residence, but nothing, connected to what occurred here.
Did he typically live alone at this house?
That's my understanding, yes.
Will the surviving victim be facing charges or unknown as to this point?
I don't see anything facing him right now.
Were all three victims using cocaine for a 3-day period?
That's my understanding.
And did the shooter explain why he did this? Did he give a statement to the police?
Yeah, he didn't give any explanation as to why he shot our actually deceased victim. He claimed that, again, that the individual he had handcuffed was an Algerian spy.
What's your reaction to that?
I know he has a military background. I suspect there's a mental health issue on top of the cocaine use and the sleep deprivation. And it's just, quite honestly, it's just a bizarre scenario. You couldn't make it up. You couldn't write a TV show like that. So I just have no words for it. It's just,
How complex is it when officers arrive to a scene where they don't know what's going on and there's like multiple things happening at the same time?
it's extremely complex. Extremely complex. You know, they have a lot of things to be concerned about. There were actually people out and about moving around on the street. You don't know who's friend, who's foe. You don't know who's a victim and who's a suspect. You know, so there are a lot of things to be concerned about. We had 2 residences that we were concerned were occupied. There could be further victims. There could be further shooters. You know, you have to go and you have to look for victims, but you also have to be safe and, you know, be aware that somebody might shoot at you. So there's just a lot of things to process and think about, and it's very chaotic.
You say Hobel has a military background, and if so, what is that?
I don't have all the information on it. We're still doing our research on that, and he's not been really able to provide us a lot of good information. But I know he has a military background. I know he'd been working with the VA.
And Chief, the interaction with the neighbor. So one of the, I think it was, you said was it the surviving victim or the victim that died that ran over to the neighbor's house and knocked on the door and was asking for them to call for help?
I think the neighbor quickly realized that they were in danger from the suspect, who exited the house as well and closed the door and disengaged.
And locked that door, right, until he tried to.
Yeah, it was a pretty wise move.
Did Hobel confess?
It was kind of hard to deny. We had him red-handed, so you know, he's not, like I said, in really the best state of mind right now.
We saw video, body cam video. He did comply with officers once they arrived.
He did. He did.
When you say you caught him red-handed, do you have him on video actually committing the murder on a surveillance camera from somebody's house?
There's a witness.
There's a witness.
Mhm.
That's the guy who survived.
There's another witness.
Okay. A neighbor?
Yep.
Okay. I guess that's all I can think of. Anything else we haven't spoken to you about that you want to put out there?
Really, no. I mean, just a bizarre situation, bizarre circumstances. You know, very unique, strange. You know, I haven't seen anything like this before. But, you know, middle-aged men doing cocaine, not sleeping for 3 days, probably a bad formula. Add PTSD to the mix. This is what you get.
What does Hobel do for a living?
Yeah, I don't have any information on that. I'm not aware that he works.
So these other 2 guys are transients. So were they living there with him for a while?
Well, I know they stayed with him for the last 3 days. That's about, I don't think until that point they were there. You know, he's known to live alone.
Chief, was your department aware of his military background when you guys first responded or began?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And is he the legal owner of that gun?
To my knowledge.
You said he's in bad condition. Did he seem sad or remorseful?
He seemed under the influence, and then, you know, he was very combative at the hospital, so he needed to be treated at the hospital for that, and so he was sedated. So we haven't had an opportunity to have a really good conversation yet. So, and plus, you know, he had a mental health issue going on. So
Is he still at the hospital or is he in your guys'?
he's at the jail.
And the surviving witness or victim in this, they're doing okay now?
Yes.
If he was in the military, did he have other guns in the house, and did you search the home looking for other?
So we executed a search warrant of the home. I believe there was one other firearm and several BB guns and a few other isolated weapons inside the home. You know, that was a concern. You know, he had handcuffs in the house. You know, what else did he have? But
Any
nothing.
other drugs besides cocaine?
Some prescription drugs, you know, which could have been part of the cocktail. I don't know at this point.
How much cocaine did you find in the house?
Most of it had been consumed by the time we got to the house. There's a lot of residue and a lot of evidence of it being used, and we were advised that that's what they were doing.
His connection to these 2 guys, you said like they weren't necessarily living with him permanently, almost just kind of couch hopping. I mean, have you guys been able to fully piece together what his intentions were with how he met them? Did he offer them a room to stay? Or?
We're just not talking about a person who'd been behaving rationally and thinking rationally. You know, I don't have a better answer for you than that. What your guess is as good as mine, what he's thinking.
These guys just took him up on his offer, it sounds like, and came over?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Chief.
Have we got the mic?
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. You must wait.
Did you
I'm
say when the
working on it.
mobile has a fire?